Everyone is looking at the ceasefire headline. The real story sits in the water, a few hours after Donald Trump announced that the ceasefire with Iran would be extended. A commercial cargo vessel sailing roughly 15 nautical miles off Oman was approached by an Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the gunboat, and fired upon without warning. No radio call, no identification, no standard maritime challenge on VHF, just gunfire, directed at the bridge, the part of the ship from which officers command, navigate, and keep the vessel under control. That is why this incident matters. Not because it is dramatic, although it is. It matters because it forces a harder question, one most official statements still avoid. Was the ceasefire already dead the moment it was announced, at least at sea? Let us start with the facts. On Wednesday, April 22nd, in the early morning, the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations, the British Maritime Security Coordination Body, better known as UKMTO, issued its official alert number 041/26. The alert stated that a commercial vessel had been approached by a gunboat linked to Iran's Revolutionary Guards. And according to that alert, the gunboat did not transmit any warning on the maritime radio frequency that vessels are expected to use before intervening against another ship. No warning, no communication, no visible effort to de-escalate. It opened fire directly. The rounds caused significant damage to the cargo ship's bridge. That point is not a technical footnote. If the bridge is disabled, a ship can become partially blind, difficult to maneuver, and in some circumstances effectively ungovernable in crowded waters. There was one piece of good news. No casualties were reported. The crew survived. No major fire broke out, and there was no serious environmental spill. Despite the damage, the vessel was able to continue its voyage. But the timing is the real shock. This attack did not happen days after the ceasefire extension. It happened within hours, not after a week of creeping confusion. Within hours, that destroys the comforting narrative that the truce, even if fragile, had at least bought time on paper, perhaps on the water. The picture is much harsher. The Gulf did not receive the memo, or it rejected it. And this was not an isolated anomaly appearing out of nowhere. Since February 28th, the date identified as the start of the war in this phase of the crisis, UKMTO had already recorded 33 incidents affecting commercial shipping in the area, 20 confirmed attacks and 13 suspicious activities. This morning's strike became incident number 34, and it happened while a ceasefire was officially in force. That is the first reality check. Ceasefires are not tested by speeches. They are tested by the behavior of armed men under stress in tight waters with unclear rules and political pressure from above. A truce that does not alter conduct at sea is not a truce in any operational sense. So the question is not simply what happened. The question is why now? Why this morning, just hours after the extension of the truce? Why attack a civilian cargo ship at the precise moment the world was being told to exhale? There are at least three serious readings. The first is deliberate diplomatic sabotage. Under this interpretation, the Revolutionary Guards were sending a message not only to Washington, but to negotiators and to every shipping company studying the map of the Gulf of Oman. The message would be blunt. The ceasefire is not a blank check. As long as the American naval blockade of Iranian ports remains in place, maritime traffic will not move normally through these waters. You choke our ports, we choke your route. It is brutal reciprocity, and in this region, brutal reciprocity is often more influential than formal diplomacy. One detail strengthens that interpretation. The attack took place on April 22nd, the anniversary associated with the founding of the Revolutionary Guards, and earlier that same day, the Guards had issued a statement declaring that they were at the highest level of readiness and that they would deliver crushing and unimaginable blows to the enemy. Crushing and unimaginable blows. Then, hours later, a Guard gunboat fires on a commercial vessel. People can decide for themselves how much coincidence they believe in. The sequence speaks for itself. The second reading is less theatrical, but not less serious. It is possible that the commander of the gunboat acted on local judgment with incomplete instruction or without direct authorization from the top. In war zones, field commanders sometimes interpret loose rules of engagement in ways political leaders later regret. If that is what happened here, the implications are still severe, because a ceasefire that can be overturned by one captain with a gunboat is not a functioning ceasefire. It means command and control is too weak, too fragmented, or too politically contested to guarantee the safety of civilian traffic. The third reading turns inward, toward Iran's own internal power structure. There has long been tension between those inside the Iranian system who are willing to negotiate under pressure and those who reject any negotiation conducted under what they see as American coercion, especially a naval blockade. The Revolutionary Guards clearly belong to the harder line. Under this interpretation, the attack was not only aimed at the United States, it may also have been aimed at Iran's own political moderates. So whatever you negotiate on paper, behavior on the water will not change unless we decide it changes. If that is correct, then the problem is not merely bilateral. It is internal to the Iranian system, and internal fractures are much harder for outside diplomacy to solve because there is no single switch to flip, no one chain of command to trust completely, no clean guarantee that an agreement reached in a room will be obeyed in a strait. To understand why this attack lands with such force, the ceasefire itself has to be examined honestly. From the beginning, it contained a contradiction. Trump announced a truce, but the United States maintained the naval blockade on Iranian ports. For Washington, that blockade was leverage. For Tehran, it was proof that the war had not truly ended. You cannot tell a country that hostilities are paused while continuing to strangle its maritime exports and cut off a vital artery of trade. That is not peace. That is coercion in a quieter uniform. Trump was explicit about the pressure on Truth Social. He emphasized the economic cost to Iran, claiming that the blockade was depriving the country of around $500 million per day. Whether one accepts the precise figure or not, the strategic point was clear. The blockade was designed to keep Iran bleeding while negotiations were discussed. That means the conflict did not actually stop at sea. It changed shape. Less spectacular than airstrikes? Yes. Less visible than missile launches on television? Yes. But the maritime confrontation continued. And in some ways it became more dangerous because it moved into the gray zone between war and commerce. Look at the sequence in the days before this latest attack. On April 19th, the United States seized the Iranian cargo vessel Tuska. The destroyer USS Spruance intercepted the roughly 270-meter ship, fired into its engine room, and American Marines boarded and took control. Iran denounced that operation as maritime piracy. Washington framed it as enforcement. The language differed, but the operational reality was the same. One side was physically taking ships, and the other side was watching every move. Then on April 20th, Trump publicly accused Iran of firing on vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, calling that a total violation of the ceasefire. Iran responded in the opposite direction, arguing that it was the party being violated, two narratives, two legal positions, two chains of accusation moving toward collision. Then came April 22nd, another attack, another commercial vessel, another signal that the line between a suspended conflict and an active maritime war had already blurred past recognition. This is the second reality check. What we are seeing is not a clean truce, repeatedly disturbed by random incidents. We are seeing two blockades colliding, two coercive systems meeting in the same shipping lanes, with commercial mariners trapped in between. And those mariners are not abstractions. Around 20,000 seafarers have reportedly been stuck in the Persian Gulf for weeks, waiting for rotation, safe passage, or instructions that would allow them to go home. The United Nations has already had to issue an urgent appeal on their behalf. That human detail matters because the global conversation often drifts into strategy maps and statements, while the immediate burden falls on civilian crews. Every time a gunboat approaches, every time a bridge takes fire, every time a tanker is searched or seized, the people standing watch on deck absorb the first shock. What does this morning's attack confirm? At minimum, it confirms that the Revolutionary Guards have not halted their maritime operations in any reliable way. Either no order to stop was ever issued, or the order was issued and not obeyed. Both possibilities are dangerous. If no halt order existed, then the ceasefire was never intended to apply fully at sea. If the order existed but was ignored, then the Iranian government does not fully control the forces operating in its name. In either case, confidence in diplomacy drops sharply. That leads directly to the possible path forward. The first scenario is that this remains an isolated incident and the ceasefire survives in damaged form. Tehran quietly distances itself. Trump responds with words rather than strikes, and indirect negotiations resume after another round of tension. Possible? Yes. Easy? No. For that scenario to hold, Iran would need to send some signal, public or private, that the attack did not represent an endorsed escalation. At the time this script is being recorded, no clear Iranian condemnation has emerged. Silence in moments like this is also a form of messaging. The second scenario is a long, uncomfortable maritime Cold War. The United States keeps the blockade pressure in place. The Revolutionary Guards continue harassment, interceptions, intimidation, and controlled attacks below the threshold that would automatically trigger a major American bombardment campaign. This is probably the most plausible short-term outcome. It offers each side room to avoid full war while preserving leverage, but it is a deeply unstable equilibrium because it relies on restraint in an environment built to destroy. Restraint: a single dead sailor, a single tanker fire, a single Allied ship sunk or badly damaged, that is all it could take to move the entire confrontation from pressure to open escalation. In strategic terms, this is not stability, it is suspended impact. The third scenario is direct escalation. Trump could use this incident or the next one as justification for military retaliation against Iranian gunboats approaching commercial traffic. Iran would answer, and the conflict would slide back into overt war. Is that imminent? Probably not. At least not today. Trump appears to want an agreement more than a prolonged war, and both sides still have incentives to avoid a spiraling confrontation. But that calculation can change instantly if Americans are killed or if a vessel from an allied nation goes down in flames. That is why the attack matters far beyond the damaged bridge of one cargo ship. Every incident raises the political cost of restraint. Every attack narrows the room for ambiguity. And every failure to punish or disavow creates fresh incentives for the other side to test the limits again. There is also an economic layer that should not be underestimated. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the decisive choke points in the global energy system, handling roughly 1/5 of the world's oil and natural gas flows. What happens there does not stay there. Shipping insurance rises, freight calculations change, energy traders price risk before governments finish drafting their press releases, and from there the shock spreads outward into refining, into transport, into the fuel prices and household costs paid far from the Gulf. This is where the geopolitical board and daily life connect. A burst of gunfire near Oman can end up in the price of diesel, the cost of food distribution, the premium on maritime cover, and the mood of financial markets before lunch. The chain is invisible until it hits the wallet. So when officials insist that the ceasefire still technically exists, the obvious response is, exists where? In the statement, yes, in the water. That answer is much harder because the sea is where policy meets, steel, fuel, stress, and men with weapons. And the sea, unlike a press room, does not reward ambiguity for very long. A bridge hit is not a talking point. A boarding action is not a rumor. A radio channel left silent before opening fire is not a misunderstanding. It is conduct. There is another detail worth holding on to. The attack did not produce casualties this time. That fact may prevent immediate military retaliation, and it may buy negotiators a narrow window to keep the situation from collapsing. But it would be a mistake to confuse the absence of fatalities with the absence of escalation. Sometimes the most dangerous incidents are the ones that stop just short of mass loss of life. They normalize risk. They encourage each side to believe it can keep pushing without crossing the final red line. That is how a system drifts toward disaster while still telling itself it remains in control. So where does that leave the ceasefire? The most honest answer is uncomfortable. On land and in official communiques, some version of it may still exist. At sea, it never fully took hold. The Maritime War did not stop. It mutated. It became quieter in form, more selective in method, and more deniable in presentation, but it continued to operate under the surface of the diplomatic narrative. That is the central point. Not whether one side can still claim legal compliance, not whether one spokesperson phrases the incident as provocation or response. The real point is that commercial shipping remains inside an active, coercive battle space. In practical terms, that means the next few hours and days matter enormously. What Tehran says or refuses to say will matter. What Trump says, and whether he merely posts or actually orders a response, will matter. Whether back-channel negotiations remain alive behind the noise will matter even more. For now, the gap between the official story and the operational reality is wide. Officials speak of extension, patience, and process. The water speaks in a different language. Interception, blockade, intimidation, warning shots, and now direct fire on a commercial bridge. If there is a final lesson in this episode, it is a hard one. A ceasefire is only real when the people with guns accept it, the command structures enforce it, and civilian traffic can move without becoming a bargaining chip. Remove any one of those elements, and the truce becomes theater. This morning, off Oman, the theater cracked. A cargo ship kept moving, its crew survived, and the world avoided the worst-case headline for one more day. But the underlying structure did not improve. It was exposed. So the question remains open, and it is no longer a rhetorical question. Can this ceasefire still hold, or is it already dead in practice, even if no government is ready to pronounce the words? The answer will not come from slogans. It will come from what happens next on the water.